Well, good afternoon and happy Tuesday, everybody. It's Brian. And today I wanted to put together a webinar on the production management process that we'll be using as we embark on the true production phase of our game making projects. I want to talk a little bit philosophically about why we're doing what we're doing, but I do want to spend most of the time actually going through the tool that we'll be using to manage projects as we go into full production and demonstrate the techniques that you guys will be able to use in conjunction with us to keep track of things as we go into the production phase. So let's start with the philosophy for a second. Why are we doing production management the way that we're going to do it? I would say there are two key reasons behind it. One of them is to make sure that we're working on things in the right order. For those of you who have seen our production scoping webinar or read the document I put together on project management from which the material in this webinar is drawn, especially the philosophy. And if you haven't, I'll post a link in the description and you can check it out. You'll notice that sort of one of the main principles that I've identified is very often as you approach a deadline in production, you end up with more stuff you want to do than you have time to do it in. And that's a perfectly normal situation, but since it happens so frequently, we want to make sure we approach things in a way where if time runs out and we get a little bit short and we can't get to everything we want to get to, we're getting to the most important stuff. And if we're missing, if we don't get to certain things, it's the least important stuff. So we want to work stuff in the right order. And ideally, all the time, we would work stuff in the order from most important to least important. We can't always do that because of the relationships between tasks and things that depend on other things. But we want to try to approach that as much as we can. So working things in the right order is a key principle. The second key principle is we want to have a system that's relatively self-managing for you as teams. What do I mean by that? So you guys don't have a full-time producer dedicated to your project. There's not someone who 24 hours a day is monitoring what's going on your project and making sure that you're getting to all the right stuff, assigning out work, checking in on folks as if they've completed their tasks or not. You guys don't have that. Some professional game studios, many professional game studios do. You guys don't. We therefore want a system that you guys can use yourselves that will show you what you should be working on next, will let you as well as us track where you're at, and that can be done without someone having to constantly go in and ask you for updates or push tasks to you. We want you to be able to pull, if you will, the things that you're going to do to yourselves. So that's why we're going to take the approach that we're going to take. That approach is called Kanban. And it's a term that you will often encounter in production shops. It's less used in the game industry than in some other areas, but I think it's a great approach for small teams who aren't necessarily working full-time like the project teams you'll see in our program. So before we get into the details of Kanban, I want to talk about how we represent things in your project and introduce you to the tool we'll be using to manage projects, Monday.com. So as we exit the concept phase, hopefully by now, you all have identified the features that you need for your game to be complete and hit your next milestone. That's something that we've done interactively throughout the design and concepting process. It's reflected in your design documents, and we know what they are. You also, in a lot of cases, will have put together things like asset lists where you're identifying, well, these are the 3D models I need. These are the characters I need. Systems list. These are the systems I need to build to make my game work. All of that is great and is preliminary to the project management process, or at least the first phase of the project management process. What we're then going to do together is go through all of that material, your designs, your asset lists, your systems lists, so on and so forth. And we're going to use that to identify the tasks that need to get done on your project. What is a task? So a task is a concrete, specific unit of work for some person on the team. And I want to break that down because it's important. So the first part of that is it's concrete and specific. It is do something, make this. We can identify what the output of that task will be. It will be something tangible. That could be a design document that you write. That could be a bit of code that you create to make a system. And we could say there's the code. That could be an art asset, right? But it's something concrete and specific so we can know when it's done because we can see the thing. The second component of it is it's something, some work for some specific person. A task should always be able to be completed by one person on your team. It shouldn't bounce around from person to person. Now, sometimes to achieve something, you do need work for multiple people. For example, if you want the fully realized enemy with AI that your design calls for, someone, probably a designer, has to write the spec for that AI. Someone else has to actually implement the behavior in code. Someone else has to make the art asset. That's all well and good. And then it all has to get put together. That's all well and good. But in that case, the spec, the actual engineering implementation, and the 3D model should be broken down into 3 separate tasks. So that feature, the feature of the AI enemy, is going to get broken down into 3 separate tasks, each one representing a piece of work for someone on the team that results in a concrete deliverable. Again, the design document, the bit of code, the 3D model. The final element of this definition is it should be something that can be completed in a relatively short space of time. How short is relatively short? We can be a little bit loose on that, but not too loose. So I don't think any task should take more than a day or 2 for someone to complete if they're really working on it. Certainly if something is going to take someone a week or 2 weeks, that should be broken down into smaller tasks. Again, a day or 2 each at most. And at the conclusion of the webinar, I'll talk about why that matters and why it's useful to be able to break that down. So again, those are our 3 aspects of tasks. Results in something concrete, is work for some specific person, can be completed in a relatively short space of time, such as a day or 2. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at Monday.com, where I've already started to break down some of the tasks for one of our projects. So this is a project from one of our teams. I hope they're not embarrassed by me showing them. This is our team doing a project called Garoob. And I have gone ahead and based on my interactions with them in my design documents, I've started to break down the tasks they need to get through this team production phase. This is the phase of this project where we're getting ready for the high school students to become involved, the team production phase. Every row you see here is a task that I've identified. And you can see information about them. So I've named each feature. I've identified what project it's on. And again, on this board, you can see this board is just for our friends working on Garoob. I've identified the project because there are other views of this I'm going to have access to, helping manage a bunch of projects, and I want to be able to see tasks across projects, so I do have a project identifier on it. We have a owner field, which refers to the specific person who's going to be responsible for working on that task, right? Some of these are populated, some of them are not right now, and we'll see why. There's then a field for disciplines, and this says which areas of game making contribute to this particular task. Some, like these first few, only have one area involved, engineering, design. Some of them have multiple, design and art. There is then a status, and this tells us what stage of the process of getting done is this task in. That's going to be super important when we take a different look at these tasks later. There is a priority field, and the priority can be low, medium, or high, which gives us a sense of how important this task is to get done relative to other tasks during this same team production phase of production. And the more important it is, the sooner we should work it. And then the final field that I'm using here is this field called dependent on. Many times, tasks will have what are called dependencies. What a dependency is it says, before you can complete this task, this other task needs to be completed. For example, going back to the prior one, before the engineer can code up the enemy's behavior, the functional spec needs to be written, right? The engineer needs to reference the functional spec describing the behavior before he can code it up. So we would say the task of coding up the functional spec, the task of coding up the enemy AI is dependent on the task to create the functional spec, or it has a dependency, right? Now, saying something has a dependency really just identifies the relationships between these different tasks. Now, if you have a task that has a dependency on it that isn't done yet, so continuing with that example, we know the engineering task is dependent on the functional spec being written. If the functional spec has not been written yet, we say the engineering task is blocked. The engineer can't complete that task yet for lack of the functional spec, right? If the functional spec has been written and it's available to the engineer, that task is unblocked, and in theory, the engineer could go in and start coding that up right now. So the last thing I'll point out on the Monday board is there's a field here next to the feature that's called conversation. And this is a place where we can take notes, link to files, do all sorts of stuff related to that task to keep track of it. On some of these, I've made some notes just saying, well, hey, this was about a functional spec for the player controller, and noting a couple of items based on the last meeting I had with the team that we wanted to make sure it addressed, right? So that's a great place to keep track of stuff. And we can close that little view anytime we want and get out of there. In theory, we can. That way. Okay, so that is a master task list. And very often when I'm adding tasks to a project, I do it just by adding them right here on this screen. Now, this is not the screen, however, your teams will be interacting with as you begin to work on the projects. The screen that I want you guys to be working on is one that presents a different view of these tasks. That view is called a Kanban view, and we're going to take a look at it now. So all I'm doing here is I'm switching from this view of Garoob tasks that says main table, which is the view you see now, to the view that's called Kanban. It looks very different, but all it's done is reorganized and represented the same information we were just looking at on those very same cards, right? Pertaining to those very same tasks. What it's done is it's created columns, and they don't all fit quite on one screen at once, but there are a total of 5 that we really care about. And those 5 actually do fit on the screen. They're the 5 you see there. And then there's another column over here that's kind of a dumping ground if we ever decide not to do a task, it ends up there, but don't worry about that for now. And you can see there are these 5 columns that represent the workflow or the steps a task is going to go through to be completed. And this is where this view of things, I hope, will be helpful for you guys organizing your project. So how are you going to work with things in Kanban view? Let's start at the very left side of the board over here and look at our first status, our first column in Kanban. That column is called the backlog workable column. This column represents tasks that no one has started yet, but could be started right now. They're workable. In other words, they're not blocked. Every one of these tasks, in theory, someone could start working on right now. This is the place you're going to look to as a team for the things you're going to do. right? So how am I going to do that? I am going to look for the highest priority thing, the highest priority task in this phase of production that I myself am capable of working on, right? I'm going to do that by scrolling through this column and identifying that based on the data I see in front of me. In a lot of systems, there are ways to sort your Kanban columns and actually to have them present in this default order where the highest priority stuff does come up to the top. Unfortunately, Monday doesn't have as robust capabilities for that. I like it for a lot of other reasons, so we're going to use it. But this is a little bit of a manual process, but try not to be too put off by it. So for example, let's say I'm an engineer. I'm someone who's going to be doing code on this project. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start going down the backlog, and I'm looking for a task that's tagged with the engineering discipline for the team production phase that has the highest priority out there on the board. So let's start looking. I see design. Oh, there's an engineering, and its priority is medium. Okay. Engineering medium. There's another one. Engineering medium. Art medium. Art design. Okay, there were a few engineering tasks, and they were all medium. So I'm going to take one of those. It kind of doesn't matter which one of those I'll take. I'll take the first one, and it says that's menu system implementation. Okay, I'm going to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am now going to assign this task to myself. I'm going to click on this button and say, who's it assigned to? Me, Brian. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this task from the backlog workable column to the in progress workable column, and I'm going to drop it there. What I have now said is that task is being worked, and that task is mine, and I am working on it. And now I'm going to go do that. I'm going to actually go work on that task. Some rules about this. First of all, ideally, I should not personally have more than one task in the in-progress workable at a time. I should work a task until I get it done or until I become blocked. How might I become blocked? I might start to do it and realize in this example, oh, you know what? The functional spec doesn't address something that's really important on this project. Let me go and go to my designer and get clarification. Now, if that happened and I became blocked, what I would do with this task is I would click on it. I can add a little note and I might say, need clarification about enemy behavior. Whoops, you guys aren't seeing that. Sorry, let's bring that up. And then what I would do is move it to the in progress blocked column. And what that says is I can't make any progress on that because I am blocked. I need that blockage to be resolved before I can do it. So let's say I go and I reach out to my designer and I say, hey, what's the story with this? My designer clarifies for me. I'm like, awesome, that's great. I'll update with another note, got clarification. I don't know how the enemy behavior would apply to a menu system, which is what this is technically about, but just go with it for the purposes of the example. I'll do that, and then I'll move the task back over into the in progress workable column. Then, let's say I work it to completion. When it's done, what do? I take it, I move it to the done column, and I go look in backlog workable. for my next task and repeat the process. Again, looking for the highest priority thing that I'm capable of working on, and then I do it. That's the process over and over again. There's really nothing more to it than that. A few more words of caution, though, however. The first one is, other than that move where I take something from blocked and I go back to in progress, which can happen in the backlog also. So for example, there are a number of tasks here in this backlog blocked column right now because no one's working on them yet, but I know there are things that need to get resolved before they can be worked. Once those things get resolved, they should move from backlog blocked to backlog workable, right? But other than that move, backlog blocked to backlogged workable, or in progress block to in progress workable when something becomes unblocked. Other than that, things never move backwards on a Kanban board. They only move forwards, right? So you never take something, for example, and this is the big no-no, and go from in progress and put it back in the backlog. That's a party foul. We never do that, right? A producer or someone, if you had a QA process, for example, and someone identified that something that you thought was done really wasn't done or wasn't done adequately, they can make the move from done back to in progress, right? But other than that, things don't move backwards. That's the general shape of how a Kanban board works. And you can see how all of the principles we talked about at the beginning apply here, right? You guys are pulling tasks out of the backlog to yourselves and working them, and then you go ahead and put them in the done column when they're done, or you move them into a blocked column if they become blocked, right? No one is assigning tasks out to you. And in general, we're not having to get together every day and talk about, well, what's the most important thing? Because we've already prioritized at the very beginning of the process the relative importance of things to the whole project. And so as long as you're pulling the most important stuff that can be worked at any given time, and you work it, then you're going to be in good shape. And that's part of the philosophy of Kanban and why we do things the way that we do. Now, some other things to be aware of here. As a producer, folks like myself will be checking in on this. And if we see things in the blocked column, we'll be working on you to help resolve them. Things shouldn't be hanging out in a blocked column for excessive periods of time. They really should be getting through there in relatively short spaces of time. And so it's a bit of a yellow flag if something hangs out there and you want to make sure you're looking at it and addressing it as the project team, in addition to us doing that as producers. Now, you'll recall that I mentioned earlier on in the discussion why these statuses are important, and in particular, why it's important that every task represent only a day, maybe two, of work for something, and we break things down into tasks that are about that unit. The reason for that is the key technique I'm going to use as a producer to see where your progress is at is something called a burn down. How does a burn down work? I'm going to demonstrate it for you in a very manual way here. I will use a report to do it in an automated way, but you'll see how a burn down works and how this way of organizing things makes it really efficient to do one, and avoids you guys having to say things like, well, I think this is going to take me 3 days, or I'm kind of part of the way through this, or whatever. As long as we make sure that we break things down appropriately so every item is about a day or two's worth of work, you're going to be okay. Right? And you'll see why. So what a burn down is a burn down is a producer working out how much more work there is to do relative to how much time the team has to do it. How does this work? Check it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start counting tasks that are not yet done based on discipline. So let's take design as an example, right? So over here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. In the backlog blocked, I have 1, 2, 3. And in the in progress workable, I have, because these, again, still aren't done yet, even though they're being worked on, I have 1, 2, 3 also. No, I actually have to do that total count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then there were 3 here, so 12. So that's a total of 12 design tasks that need to be done. If each one of those tasks represents a day of work-ish for a designer, right? A day to 2 days. That would be 12 to 24 man days to get those done. So, let's split the difference, right? And say 18 man days to do all the design work we need to do in this production phase. The next question I'm going to ask myself is, how much time from designers do we have on this project? If there's only one designer on the project, as is the case with most of these projects, and the designer has 20 days on which they can work on the project, well, then we're doing pretty good, right? 18 things to do, 20-something days to do them in, we're doing awesome. If there are 18 days worth of work to do, and there are only 6 days left from the designer, then we're not doing so awesome, right? That's the idea of a burn down. It lets me know how much work there is by discipline against the resources that there are to do it. I'll be doing burn downs every couple of days as we go through the production phase. And that will be my tool to see how you're doing and when a check-in might be required. But you can do them just as easily too. And in fact, I'll probably expose to your teams the reports that I'll be using to do that, so you can very easily see your burn downs. That's the approach we're going to take to production. There are many other approaches that folks, do take to this. And some of them are a lot more onerous than others. Some of them you have to spend more time in a tool like this. Some of them the team gets together and talks about things on a daily basis or an hourly basis, right? We're trying not to do that because we know you guys are working on other things, you have other commitments, and you're also working at different times than each other. And so that's why we're doing this approach. I think you will find it helpful and not too demanding, and not to create too much excess work. And at the end of the day, that's important to you, because we want you guys making games, not spending time on the process of managing making games. So that's what the approach will be. And, I wish you guys good luck as we embark on the production phase.